All right. So at this point, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all very much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time and having the courage to join us for this first round of doing a hybrid of online and in-person. Just as a reminder, we do ask you to have your microphone muted just to cut down extraneous noises, but definitely feel free to ask questions in the chat session and to unmute yourself to ask questions as we go. This is very much designed to be a question and answer, a source of discussion and dialogue. This is about us creating the community and creating the team, and about really localizing the information that you're learning through the online curriculum and filling in any gaps that, that exist. So the folks that are here, there's myself, who's acting as the course coordinator, Selena Brown, who is the official Woodside Fire Protection District Emergency Preparedness Coordinator. Say that 5 times fast. And then we have on the line as well, Chip Swan, David Ellison, Vicki Coe. We do not have any of the firefighter paramedics with us online today, but we are looking forward to them joining us when we do the in-person skills at some point come February or to be determined. Do any of my co-hosts want to add anything at this point?
And Mark Dolan.
Ah, yes, Mark, I'm so sorry, who is the chair of the WPV-CERT committee. So where are we? We have so far covered units 1 through 3 in terms of just the setting the stage in terms of disaster preparedness and the what is a CERT team, and starting into the basics of disaster medical operations with a real emphasis on what are life-threatening injuries and what are those things that you have to address right now to buy yourself some more time. We introduced but did not go into any great depth in basic first aid. We will be getting to that when we do the in-person. And so today we're going to be diving a little bit more into the operational side of medical operations. And if time permits, we will also get into some of the disaster psychology. That said, this is our first time running the hybrid course, so we are perfectly willing to slide the schedule around in order to meet your needs. So definitely, please do ask questions. This is a broad stroke schedule, and there is nothing sacred about it. In answer to the question that came up before, the next Monday, we will have another session, and then we will take a break until January 11th. This is also a great opportunity that if you have friends, neighbors, family members who would like to catch up, we strongly encourage people to recruit and to add people that over the course of that, I forget if it's 4 or 5 weeks, is plenty of time to go through the units on the online course, and that everything that we're doing here is meant to enhance the online course. But that online course is the only part that is the online course, and the in-person skills testing is the official component. And then everything else that we're doing is really enriching that. Something else that you see is that we do have coming up on Saturday, one of our training webinars focusing in greater depth about radio operations. Actually, are there any questions about the schedule before I dive into Unit 4, Disaster Medical Operations?
I had a question, just a general question. Are you going to address these operations during COVID times, specifically first aid during COVID?
So we are going to talk a little bit about public health components today. It is not COVID specific, but it's about public health in general.
Yeah, I had read some email that they're recommending chest compressions only, not mouth to mouth.
Actually, we will talk, that's actually a really good question, and we will talk about that when we get into triage.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any other questions before I go on? All right. So, oh, was that the beginnings of a question? Or maybe that's somebody who needs to mute their mic. Just as a gentle reminder, please do mute your mic when you're not asking a direct question. So one of the big things about community emergency response teams is that this is more than just us responding as an individual. This is about us responding as a team. And so as a part of that, one of the things that we have to remember is that we are looking at the how do we do this on a methodical, thorough, and organized manner. And something that really should be reminded, that is worth repeating every single time we meet, and forgive me if I don't, but it definitely should be, is that we work as a team and our personal safety is always number one. We do not want to increase the number of victims, we want to decrease it. And so we have to, as we are responders, we need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves as well. And a large part of that is that question of making sure that we have and that we make use of the personal protective equipment. Some of that is to protect us from healthcare issues, using N95 masks, using gloves, and some of that is to protect us from physical hazards with helmets, goggles, and boots. And just as a reminder that really what we're trying to do is create order out of chaos. Our focus is to really, what is a means by which we can do the greatest good for the greatest number of people?
Pam, may I also add, scene safety is an important element of personal safety.
Absolutely. And something that I introduced last week, and I think it bears repeating, is that you'll never see a professional responder running towards a scene. They're always approaching with a calm demeanor. Not only is that because it makes them look good, which it does, but also because they are looking at the scene and really considering what are the potential hazards to myself, to my partner, and to the victim. Is this a safe environment to respond? So, Carol, in part because of as you mentioned, the concern of our current environment of COVID, one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that not only are we taking care of people in terms of their immediate health, but by taking into account public health considerations, that we are taking care of ourselves in terms of immediate, but also that is the longer term aspects of the disaster. And so how do we do that? And a lot of that goes back to what we're taught in kindergarten. Wash your hands and use proper sanitation. This is something that the online course did not go into much detail. So I want to take a moment and just kind of go into some details about that. And actually something to add is that this slide says preventing spread of disease. And as we're well aware today, that is true both from the patients to ourselves and also from ourselves to our patients. It's universal precautions. So how do we do hygiene? And certainly part of that is knowing the importance of washing our hands. And if we wash our hands, and as I'm sure you've heard many times, the importance of doing so with soap and water. A lot of diseases, including COVID, are actually very vulnerable to the effect of soap and water, and that can destroy it. But it has to be in that and the act of actually physically removing it. And so the act of the physical rubbing of our hands, of getting all aspects of the hands is significant. If soap and water are not available, alcohol-based sanitizer is also an alternative. We wear gloves when anytime that we're going to be in contact with somebody else, and if it's wet and sticky in ours, we don't want to be in direct contact with it. And so that use of gloves is very significant. One of the skills that we'll go over in the hands-on session is, and has been mentioned before, is the significance of not just having gloves, but being able to safely remove gloves. Out of curiosity, did anyone practice using either ketchup or any other material and try taking their gloves off without being contaminated?
I laughed because I didn't have to. I used to work in a lab and I'm really pretty good at getting gloves off without getting anything on me. So.
That's fantastic.
I have a glove related question. When you say non-latex, does that mean nitrile?
Yes. And the reason for that is that even if you don't have a latex allergy, somebody else might.
And that's kind of if I see somebody, how do I notice that they have a latex allergy? Or you don't have to if you wear the right gloves.
Right. Basically, to prevent us from having to even ask the question, we stock our supplies, and we encourage you to stock your supplies with non-latex gloves.
So the other thing that you can use that are non-latex, especially if you're not doing something very skilled, are those bags that the grocery stores wear. They're very cheap. You can buy a bag of 100 of them for, I think, $8 or something, which is a good thing to in your CERT bag, because then you have a ample supply of gloves that you can go patient to patient and change in between.
Yeah, the food handling gloves, they're, what people wear when they're serving food lines, and you see them all the time.
The other thing that's really nice about those food handling gloves is that they are not as tight as the N95s. So if you are doing something that does not require that level of dexterity, say reaching into your first aid kit, then they're much easier to actually take on and off, less expensive as well. But it really does bring up that you have to consider, what are you touching after you've been in contact with a patient? And so that idea of you need to be able to change your gloves or disinfect your gloves between patients, because not only are you trying to protect yourself from the patient and the patient from you, but also patients from each other.
And protect your supplies.
And protect your supplies, absolutely. We talked, obviously we have become intimately familiar with the importance of N95 masks. I just want to reinforce that you want to have an N95 mask that does not have an exhalation valve on it. Those valves then, if let's say that you were in an environment that you were protecting yourself from dust rather than in infectious disease, that would protect you, but then you're exhaling everything everywhere. And that's why the masks that you see with that exhalation valve is not appropriate for in terms of public health situation. The other thing to be aware of, and that people are becoming more aware of, is the importance of protecting your eyes as well as your mouth and nose. Basically, any part of your body that is wet, including your eyes, is a potential vulnerability to an airborne disease like COVID.
So I don't know if anybody can see this or not, probably not, but the other thing is you can get, if you only have access to valve 95s, you can put one of those inside of a regular cloth mask. It can go in this little, for example, and then you're achieving both things. You're protecting yourself as well as the patient.
Excellent point. So the other thing that we need to do a lot of times is in terms of cleaning wounds or having clean water to drink or any other use of water, we need to be able to clean water. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. There's the classic boiling it for a minute. There are also water filtration systems like there's the Steri-Straw, and there's also the possibility of using bleach as a way of killing bacteria. And this is something that in terms of both for individual supplies and also for the CERT team supplies is that it's something to make sure that you have the ability to either boil water or that you have some other means of cleaning water. Any other questions or thoughts about public health considerations before we talk about large-scale incidents?
Just a quick question. Do we assume here in Portola Valley that there will be water available in case of an earthquake, for example? Or is it all going to be gone?
You should not make that assumption. In general, water is one of the very limited resources in the event of a disaster. And I would encourage everybody to have the containers of water as a part of your shelter in place emergency kit.
Yeah, a gallon per person per day. And if you look at the store website for Ready, you can buy them. Chip, I think, still has an ample supply of them, correct? I don't know if Chip has heard me.
Yes, and I can get more. Feel free to order all you want.
And the other thing that people might want to add to their CERT bags to be able to protect themselves and to go from patient to patient is that they're very, very inexpensive plastic aprons that basically go from your neck down to mid calf level. And that way you're not contaminating your own clothes or having contaminated clothes that you then come in contact with the patient. So they're cheap, they're easy, they're very compact. So I'd throw those in my bag as well.
Fantastic. So when we talk about why is it that we have CERT teams? We have CERT teams oftentimes because in the event of a disaster or in the event of a mass casualty incident, a mass casualty incident is any time that the number of the injured is overwhelming local resources. It doesn't have to be a large regional event, but if there is a situation where the local resources are not able to handle it, that's what we call a mass casualty incident. And in response to that, we set up what we call disaster medical operations. I noticed on this slide that there was jargon. I want to encourage everybody to be comfortable to, if there's at some point a phrase that doesn't make sense or an acronym, to yell out jargon alert and to ask for clarification, because there is a lot of jargon. In this case, ops refers to operations. Sometimes you'll hear a reference to logs, which is short for logistics, comms, which is short for communications. Some of them are easy to figure out, but sometimes it's not obvious. And I really want to encourage and empower everyone to say, hey, wait, what does that mean? And another acronym, MCI, Mass Casualty Incident. You've probably become familiar with PPE, Personal Protective Equipment. But it's really important that to speak up if something is said that doesn't make sense. So when we talk about how do we organize our operations, you can see that it's broken up into a number of components. And we're going to start by really focusing on triage and that initial assessment that's done during the search and rescue phase. Triage is actually a French word that means to sort, and that's exactly what we're doing. When we have more victims than we've got responders, we need to have a reliable way of determining who needs help right now, who can wait. And it's not a question of whether or not it's like whether or not they're going to be treated at all. It's just a question of timing. And so that initial assessment, as I said, is referred to as triage. And it literally is dividing people into different buckets. And this is a standard that is used throughout the country, throughout the world. Some of the details may be different in terms of the exact terminology, but the concept is solid. That idea that there are going to be some people that have minor injuries, some that are injured, but they are not going to deteriorate right now. And there are some that need treatment right now, and there are some that are not, that are now dead. So we're not going to go into great depth about triage right now because there is an entire unit on how to do triage. And that is going to be put on the California Office of Emergency Services. They're going to have the triage unit as a standalone unit. It has not been published yet, but it will. But I wanted you to have exposure to the basic concepts because you'll see that how that manifests in how we organize our operations. Because we literally put out the green tarp, the green tent, the green area for people who have minor injuries, the yellow one for people who have delayed injuries. The ones that are immediate will be identified and placed in a red area, because that is the organization that helps us respond and do the most good for the most number of people. So that triage that we do in the field then helps inform the transport decisions. It also helps the organization when we get to the organization of the treatment area. Now, the exact details of how do you lay out that treatment area is something that's going to be a part of our advanced training. When we talk about setting up a command post, we're also going to be talking about how do you set up the treatment area and what are the things that you think about from a logistics perspective to make that as effective as possible. But at this point, I just want you to really have in your mind that mental image of literally a green tarp, having literally a yellow tarp and a red tarp, and then having, as your staffing allows, people who are assigned to each area. Actually, let me stop there for a second and just entertain any questions that you have about how we organize. And kind of this is the big picture perspective.
So quick question about, especially about the immediate treatment folks. If we're talking about kind of organizing people in a central location according to the need, I mean, I imagine this doesn't consider that it might be impossible to move some people, right? So if it's immediate and it's not close to the treatment area, we're just supposed to kind of treat them there and where they are, right?
Well, remember that when you did that first assessment that we talked a little bit last week, and you will get more of in when we talk about triage. In fact, actually, I'm gonna sneak ahead to, I'm gonna show you. Oops, let me just, you're getting a preview. So when you think about, you're doing triage. And you're basically dividing people up into are they minorly wounded? Are they someone that we're not going to be able to help? Or are they immediate? Just like we talked about, if the 3 life-threatening things that we really want you to focus on is there an obstructed airway? Are they bleeding profusely? And are they going into shock? And those are things that you will then be responding to immediately. And so that idea of you are both recognizing and you are doing a very fast treatment. Now the situation is going to be different based on how many people do you have there. If you've got the time, you may be doing some more treatment for immediate on site. If you've got literally a bus full of injured, you're going to then use triage as a way of doing the fundamentals of what might save them right now, and then tagging them as immediate and go on to the next person so that you can get the big picture before coming back. You're not going to stop and treat each person to the full extent. And that's one of the big mental challenges when you're talking about specifically a mass casualty incident. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Fantastic. And this, by the way, the slide that you're looking at is kind of a preview into the kind of detail that we'll get into when we practice doing triage. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Any other questions about operations? Okay, so we've set up we've established a treatment area. Now we have addressed the immediate life-threatening injuries. Now we're going to find out more. For when we have a patient, we're now going to do a head-to-toe assessment. That head-to-toe assessment really helps us find out what are their injuries, what are the kinds of treatment needed. It's also helping part of the documentation chain so that we can then as an organization be most effective. While we do that head-to-toe assessment, we are keeping our eyes open for those things that we looked for at the very beginning. It may be that one of those life-threatening injuries might be there that we didn't notice before. So the kind of things that we're looking for, a lot of it is looking for signs of both external bleeding, but also internal bleeding. When someone's bruising, when something's swelling up, when someone has severe pain, one of our concerns is, do they have internal bleeding going on? If we encounter something that we can address, if someone's airway starts to become obstructed, if you discover bleeding that had not been discovered before, at that point we stop the head to toe and we treat that, and then we switch gears back into life-threatening. Always think about it as you are buying yourself time so that you can then address further injuries.
And I think the other point, to the other points to be made, one is that you cannot, because you triage somebody or someone was triaged into minor category or delayed, that they're going to stay like that. Patients, especially with internal injuries or head injuries, can deteriorate over the period of time, and patients will change status from being delayed to immediate. And the other thing is with kids, start at their feet, work your way to their head for the head to toe.
Yeah. And tonight, we're not going to go into the head to toe in the level of depth. And to be honest, this is a long-term skill development. You'll learn it a little bit now, you'll learn it some more. Every time we practice, you'll learn it some more. But what I want you to have is the big picture. You want to be methodical, you want to be thorough. It is hands-on. We're talking about, and so you want to actually feel with enough pressure that you're actually feeling, and that if something's going to be a source of pain, that you're going to have that response. This is not just light, casual touch. And so sometimes things will be obvious, but sometimes they'll be subtle. And so if you think of the person, another way to visualize this is if you're doing a head to toe on someone, and you'll see this, we're going to send out a video for you to view after this, and they'll send it out to the group list. But imagine if I had paint on my hands and I was doing a head to toe on someone, pretty much everything should be touched. Everything should be covered. There shouldn't be gaps, because those gaps are where an injury could be. The other thing to be aware of is when you're doing a head to toe, is that if you find, let's say that I pull my glove off and away and there's blood on it, I need to get down to skin to see where that wound is. Because if there's a wound that's bleeding, I need to do direct pressure. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you do what the EMTs call strip and flip, but rather that you can do, like, if you've gone to have a massage, there is an art form to just removing clothing in one area at a time. So you can pretty much access everything without compromising someone's modesty. And so the combination of being mindful about that and also being matter of fact. Another thing that's really important is telling people exactly what you're doing and remaining in verbal contact with them the whole time. One other thing to remember is that some people are stoic. When you're doing a head to toe, not just ask them, how does this feel? Do you feel pain anywhere? Watch their face. Are they grimacing? Things like that. I'm going to resist the urge to go into great depth about this, mostly. But this is something that we will come back to during the in-person class, but also this is the kind of thing that we'll probably have a advanced class on that's just on doing a head to toe. It's something that we are always learning to do better and better. Any questions at that surface level about the head to toe at this point?
I had one question. I think the thing that I'm most concerned about, I have a brother who had a traumatic brain injury, and because they didn't understand that that was what was going on, was he had terrible bleeding. He ended up having a lot of brain damage, before they were able to actually drill a hole and let everything drain out and all that kind of remove the pressure from it. And I also have a dad who had strokes, and his style of communication was so good at, oh, I'm fine. Oh, everything's no problem. Oh, don't worry about it. My brother had the same thing. And so that ended up damaging both of them because they weren't complainers, they were like manly men and that kind of thing. And I just worry about a situation where somebody might have real damage. They're really in trouble. They should be one of the first people to go to the hospital if the ambulance shows up, but you don't know that.
Absolutely. And that I really appreciate you bringing that up, because mental assessment, it's easy to be fooled because people can mask it. And so that's one of the reasons why we will ask them very specific questions. And we'll ask them an open-ended question, not just, do you know what day it is? To which someone would say, yes, but can you tell me what day it is? Or, to be honest, I've worked in some contexts that people won't know what day it is, so that's not a good question. But most people will know their name, where they are, what's happening. And so having that conversation with someone is a very important part of the assessment. And that really, not making assumptions, but listening to their answer and observing them carefully is very important. As an aside, it's also good to, if there is an overly helpful friend who is answering questions for somebody, oftentimes it is helpful to have them step aside and be interviewed by somebody else so that they're not accidentally filling in the gaps for that person. So absolutely, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Because unfortunately, traumatic brain injury is not always as obvious as this guy's bump on the head. And so and a lot of times, when we'll do a head to toe, we also come back and check on people to see if things have changed. That's one of the reasons why documentation is so important. And so when we do that documentation, we're writing down what we see right now, but that also helps us see what's changing with time. So that was a whirlwind about head to toe. At this point, I want to really open it up. Do people want to talk more about, and are there more questions about how we organize medical operations, how we do head to toe? Or would people rather talk go on into Unit 5 and talking a little bit about disaster psychology? This is your class. You let me know what you want to do.
This is Robert. I'm interested in what you foresee the likely operational deployment to be here in Portola Valley. So let's say we're either working or we're at home and there is an earthquake or there is a disaster or whatever. And we perceive it's time to go check into CERT. Our family is okay, we're okay, we go to town center. From there, what is the likely deployment in terms of, if we're needed to help, I don't know, at the Sequoias or at one of the schools or in a street?
Sure. Actually, Mark, would you be comfortable covering that, or would you like me to do so?
Sure, I'm happy. Can
okay,
just putting my audio okay here? Yeah, so we're going to set up medical operations there at the town center. So based on the type of incident, if it was a large earthquake and we were taking victims that needed to be transported from different locations, we would stage them at the medical treatment area there at the Portola Valley Town Center, where they would again be triaged. So as Cam was mentioning, let's say there was a bus, you have an MCI or mass casualty incident, you've got 30 people involved. You're going to do that initial triage. And then as we can transport those victims, if there's not a way to transport them straight to professional medical care, so let's say that we already know that there's issues with the roads, we don't have transport, we would take them to the medical treatment set up at one of our CERT branches. So in your case, it would be the Portola Valley branch, where you'd have medical operations set up there. So again, as they come in, they're going to be triaged again. And then CERT members would be part of that team. So, we've got all the different components there. We've got transport, treatment, supplies, morgue, all that would happen there at the Portola Valley Town Center.
And you foresee that the triage is going to be centralized. So you move whoever you need to move to town center or wherever, and then the triage is happening there. Or do you do it in situ wherever it happens to be?
That's going to be a dynamic situation. So if you encounter somebody who's injured and it's 1 or 2 or 3 people, and you can transport them back to medical operations at town center, that's your best course of action. In a everyday scenario, we'd call 911 and first responders would show up and they'd be taken care of, they'd be triaged, they'd be transported straight to the hospital. But in a disaster scenario where that's not reasonable because of limited resources, the best scenario is for you to do that initial triage on the scene of the incident, and then do your best to transport them to medical operations at the nearest branch. So in Portola Valley, where then, let's say we have 50 victims, we can be triaging those victims and transporting the most immediate needs when transport is available to take them to more advanced medical care.
Excuse me, could you talk about a situation? I live up on the ridge, by Alice's, and the likelihood of 84 going down, because of power lines or an earthquake or a slide or something, are not unreasonable.
Absolutely, high risk up there, yep.
Right, and we do have the container that's sort of behind the little store there. Is that likely to turn into an operations center in that kind of a situation? Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. So that the Skyline is one of our branches, and so that would be one of the locations where a command post, staging, and medical operations would be set up. So that would be, of course, all based on the number of people that are available. But the ideal scenario is that if that was the case, if you were isolated up there, then CERT team members would stage there at that location and set up operations there.
So when I think about this, I think about the fact that I've got a certain number of neighbors I need to check in on. right? There's something going on. Earthquake is probably the best thing because that's something that they could be injured versus a fire where I'm just checking to make sure that they're evacuating, they're aware and whatever. So in that case, I would triage on site, and then I would assume that I would be using the radio to let other CERT people know if I've got somebody that I think either needs on-site attention or needs to be moved into the whatever location we choose based on that. And then once I've cleared the neighborhood, I would then go to the CERT site and then continue to offer assistance there.
Yeah, so the key part of this is that we check on our homes and our neighbors, and then if you have an existing WPV ready division or other HOA or setup where you've decided that you're going to be checking on these blocks or neighbors, then you do that. And once you've done that, then you proceed to the CERT staging location where you can be assigned to additional tasks as needed. And you can definitely use your radio to communicate whatever needs you might have. So once it's obviously not going to take, it's going to take a little bit of time to get a command post up and running and people talking on the radio, but you can use the radio to say, hey, I've got, 6 victims here and I need transport. And it's going to be dynamic, but over time, all these priorities will get sorted out by the command post, and we will do our best, or the command posts will do their best to allocate the resources for transport and other needs to bring those victims back to the medical treatment area.
So Mark, here was a question from Frank Rosenblum, which I think is pertinent to what we're talking about now. Does the team appoint certain personnel to doing triage because they are more experienced?
So when we check in at our CERT staging location, you can always put down what tasks you might wish to be assigned to or special skills that you might have. Obviously, if you check in and you're a CERT member and you're also have additional medical training or medical interest, then you would want to put that down and make it clear that that's where you want to be assigned.
Let me add to that as well, that a lot of this has to do with taking everything that you've learned and just creating a sense of awareness of what's going on in the situation you find yourself in. You might go to check on a neighbor and find that they're just not acting right. They've got a sore spot on their head. You might suspect that they've got some sort of a head injury that needs to be looked at rather quickly. And so that would elevate your desire to get in contact with someone and transport them down to a medical treatment center. You might encounter 5 people and 3 of them are doing just great and they pass every test and they continue to do just great. But one of them's got a broken bone sticking out of their leg and they're not going anywhere under their own power. So how do you put together the transport to get them to the right treatment area and so forth? So a lot of it really does have to do with using your skills to figure out who's hurt the worst, who's going to be okay, and who needs to be looked at soon. And then what can you do? Who can you call? How do you get them to the best treatment as soon as possible? And there is no formula that's going to work in every circumstance. It's really a matter of just kind of knowing, being fresh with how do you inspect someone to see how badly they're hurt, knowing how to contact people, how to transport people and so forth, just the various skills that you're learning now that you'll put together in a fluid fashion when the disaster happens.
Can I ask a question about supplies?
Mm-hmm.
Do we just all respond with our own kits, or is there a central supply?
So the 3 CERT branches that we have, of course, every CERT member should have a backpack with their own supplies. And of course, those supplies are so that you as a CERT member are independent and not relying upon other resources. So your CERT backpack should have things like food and water and personal items so that for an extended period of time, you're not looking for resources, you're self-supportive. Then the second part of that is CERT resources. And the answer there is that we we are building, and through some grants and other funding, we are acquiring trailers which have equipment that is stocked. Also, Portola Valley has equipment that's stocked. So as some of this gets purchased, we're going to start to put this up on the website, talk a little bit more about what's available. But the general concept is that the 3 branches, Woodside, Portola Valley, and Skyline, each have either a trailer with supplies in it, and that the supplies are there to set up the command post. It has communications. It's got medical operations supplies, search and rescue supplies, all the basic stuff that the CERT team needs to operate. And those resources will be cached at those 3 locations. So kind of jumping back to the overall question, know where you can find help, know where you can find resources. That will be, in a large scale incident, that will be the CERT branch, staging, and command post locations. That's where we're going to be staging the resources. That's where the people will meet. That's where you take somebody who needs medical care if you can't take them to professional medical care, roads are damaged, 911 doesn't work, etc.
And if I could just throw in there, really what we're creating is a multi-tiered system. So yes, in an ideal world, every home has a certain level of preparedness. In an ideal world, we'll get to the point that every neighborhood has a level of preparedness. And then there's also this CERT level of preparedness that is throughout the entire Woodside Fire Protection District area. And so ideally, these are interfacing effectively. And so that's one of the reasons why we really feel that this class is of value, even if someone is not choosing to become an active CERT responder. We still want people to be aware of, and that these are still good skills on a neighborhood level and on an individual level.
So Cam, it's Vic. I just want to add one aspect, or emphasize one that you mentioned, which is the neighborhood. Once again, on Golden Hills, where we've got 30 families, we've actually set up at one of the locations in that whole Golden Hills geography, a place where we keep our own grouping of supplies, everything from first aid to wheelchairs to stretchers and whatever else. And we've educated everybody in that neighborhood as to where that is, so that they will know it in the event of an emergency. And I think that there are other neighborhood groups that are doing the same, which I think is a very important supplement to whatever CERT is organizing on a larger basis. So if you are part of a neighborhood group of any kind, I'd urge you to consider that, because if it's obviously a serious disaster, you may not have access beyond the immediate neighborhood to gain access to that equipment.
Absolutely. There is tremendous value and need for preparedness at each level, and for there to be coordination between those levels. And that's what we're working towards.
Yeah. I see, Carol.
And a simple way to make sure that your neighborhood is prepared is to encourage all of your neighbors to get one of the first aid kits, because those were specifically designed so that you would have what you need if there's an earthquake and you can't get to help.
Yeah, and to follow up on the concept of triage or sorting, Vic, as you just said, you have a meeting place where you have some supplies. Your local neighborhood there knows that's where to go. So if we're going to be triaging or sorting medical issues throughout the entire fire district, you're the frontline triage there. So you might have 5 people show up at that location, 4 of them are minors and 1's an immediate. And maybe you don't have any additional medical capabilities there, but you've sorted, and now you're saying we need to transport that immediate. We're going to transport them down to the CERT medical operations, because then CERT medical operations can get them in line to potentially get transported to the hospital. So that's a great example of how, as Cam was saying, this is a multi-layered system. You're sorting at the local level. You're taking those with the most amount of needs, and you're filtering them up to the CERT command, CERT medical treatment, and then CERT medical can try to get them to the care that they need.
Since we have the picture up at the moment, this is a question probably for Chip. If we've ordered the orange bag, is that part of a batch order? Do you have an ETA on that? Or are they kind of one at a time?
You know, I hadn't sent out the pickup notices yet, but I'm beginning to schedule those right now. So I'm going to send you a text. Who was that? Was that Robert?
Robert, yeah.
Robert, I'll send you a text, yeah, with how to get that from me. And you can come by anytime this week and grab that. So,
thank you. And is this actually something that we should recommend to our neighbors, or is it a little bit too much?
No, absolutely, you should recommend it to everybody.
Everybody.
And it's a great present if you do that kind of holiday thing.
Yeah, good for you. Send one to your kids out of state. Yeah, no, everybody should have one of these, and CERTs should grab one and then start adding some additional things to it as they occur to you. It's a great starter for CERTs, and it's a fantastic design for, you know, what you're going to be facing after an earthquake in earthquake country kit. We're also, I just want you to know that we're in the last phases of testing. We're going to be able to ship those things directly to people when you order them pretty soon here, hopefully by the end of this week. So
I wanted to mention that a lot of I don't know how many divisions, but our division has a shipping container full of supplies, a Connex box up behind the Skywood Trading Post, and people should be aware of those containers in their divisions.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just noticed the time. So I just wanted to add a few more things before we wrap up for the night. Let me actually change it back to the slide deck. So as you go forward in the class, one thing I just want to remind you about is the presence of the participant manual. There is a lot of information in this course. A lot of it is in the actual online course itself, but there is additional content in the participant manual. And I want you to think of this as really a long time resource, not just something to take in the class and put away, but as something that we'll be coming back to. And so if you have not downloaded already, there is a link to it that you can find when you first log into the class. Also, when you go to take those quizzes, and if they frustrate you because the exact wording is not exactly what you expect, I want to just remind you that there is a link to that unit's, that chapter, and go and take a look at that chapter. And so here's a perfect example for the knowledge check for disaster psychology. When it talks about psychological first aid and the core ideas of listening, protecting, and connecting, there's some things that you might expect to be under a different heading, but they, being literal, are pulling directly from the manual. So to save yourself some pain and anguish, remember that you can always go to the manual, and I encourage you to do so. We want this to be as a learning experience and to reduce some of that testing frustration that may happen just because of the way that the quizzes are made. I'm going to jump through we'll come back and do the psychological first aid and talk about that next week. Although I will put in a little plug that if psychological first aid is something that is of a strong interest to you, there is a fantastic standalone online course that John Hopkins made. It's available through Coursera, highly recommended. So looking forward, we'll add in that disaster psychology into next week, and we will also start talking about fire safety and utility controls. Wanted to mention again that this Saturday, we will be having our radio communication class. Because we are talking about being a team, radio communication is fundamental to our ability to coordinate. And so being comfortable and familiar with the radios ahead of time, having an opportunity to practice them is absolutely essential to our ability to respond as a coordinated team. So I strongly encourage you to attend. If you can't, we will record it, we will make it available, but we value your presence there, just as we really value you taking the time to take the class, to be engaged, to be here on these Mondays. There are lots of other Zoom classes and events that you could be doing, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And with that, I would like to formally end the class. If you would like to stay on and ask questions, please feel free to do so.